Hello, my name is Ronke Olawale. I'm a PhD student in social work and anthropology here at the University of Michigan, and I'm a part of the Global Feminism project. And this project is part of our multi-site international project sponsored by the University of Michigan. Our goal in undertaking these oral histories is to create and preserve conversations with women whose activism and or scholarship has contributed in critical ways to issues that are important to women. And I thank you so much for agreeing to participate in the Global Feminism project today. We are going to spend about an hour talking about several topics. And this interview is being recorded from Judostad Center here at the University of Michigan. We will start by talking about your life and how you became involved in the work that led up to the work that you're doing right now. Your thoughts and insights about your work in the context of the women's movement and the connections you see between your work and those of activists in other parts of the world. First, we're going to start with with a question. I'll ask you about how you're doing today. So I'd like you to introduce yourself and pronounce your name the way you would like it to be pronounced, and do a spell check so that we don't misspell your name. Just introduce yourself briefly so that I get to know you. And but before I go to my questions, do you agree to participate in this interview today?
Yes, I agree to participate.
Thank you so much for your consent.
Thank you.
So what's your name? Who are you? Can you just do a brief introduction of who you are?
Right. Good morning, Ronke. Thank you very much for the question. My name is Hyeladzira James Mshelia, and Hyeladzira is spelled Hyeladzira. I see you rolling your eyes, I know. And Mshelia is spelled Mshelia. I could be addressed as Hyeladzira, that's fine. I'm a gender inclusion and environmental specialist. I've over time implemented and designed gender equality, environmental sustainability and policy influencing campaigns in not just Nigeria but across a few African countries in Africa.
Nice. Thank you so much, and I look forward to this interview and all of the exciting work that you have done in Nigeria and in parts of African countries. So first, I want like a background about your life. As you think about where you are today, I'd like to start by asking you about your personal history. Tell me something about your early years and what brought you to where you are now. What are the main commitments in your life? What does your career look like? And what do you consider your most significant lifetime achievements professionally? These are a lot of questions, but I can prompt you at this stage.
Great. Thank you very much, Ronke, once again. So I would say that my journey is a dauntless and audacious journey. I mean, it's a journey or a story of courage, I would say. So just a little background as to how everything started. So I'm from northern part of Nigeria, Borno State precisely, and I grew up in Borno. I started growing up in Borno, and then my dad was a police officer at that time, so he got transferred to the eastern part of Nigeria, which was Delta State precisely. So we were forced to, move with him. So I think I was in primary 4, I think. Okay. Yes, I was in primary 4, and then I had to complete my primary school in Delta State and start my secondary education. That was high school in Delta State. And interestingly, my sister and I were the only northerners in our school at that time. So it was a little bit hard fitting in, and there's this tag that comes with being a northerner. I don't know, it's a Nigerian thing. They just feel like if you're from the north, you're not as smart or you're not as intelligent. They tend to call you Aboki, which Aboki, by the way, means friend in Hausa, but then it's just a derogatory term that is being used to address northerners. I don't know why that has been happening and that is constantly happening. So it was really hard for my sister and I to fit in, knowing that we're the only northerners in the school. But eventually, over time, everyone warmed up to us, and it was a great experience. Well, I was fortunate to go to a good school, so I never experienced bullying, you know, or harassment or any of those things. But I would hear people, you know, talk about it, especially friends that would share personal stories. Like male friends would say things like, oh, they were abused, you know, by their nannies at a very early age and all of that. But I never experienced that. So at that time, my dad again was transferred to Lagos State. So we had to, you know, we're living in Lagos, but I was schooling in Asaba. You know, so this for me is, you know, about diversity, about being able to live with people that are not from, you know, your tribe and be able to coexist. So, but then I lost my dad while I was in secondary school.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. And we were forced to move back to the north. And in the north, you know, because there's so much religious bias, you know, there's more, you have to sort of fit in to the northern culture, you know. And when we moved in was when, you know, the Boko Haram crisis had just started in Borno State, yes. And of course, when you have conflict like that, women and girls are often at the receiving end of, you know, such conflict. They are being the most vulnerable, you know, when it comes to their health, their safety, you know, and their personal well-being. Women and girls are often at the disadvantaged stage of, you know, such insurgencies and conflict. So, but then trying to fit in back into the northern system was a little bit hard for me again, because I had become, you know, a little bit, I would say, more exposed. You know, I had gotten acquainted with the southern and eastern culture, and again, it was a difficult task fitting in. And because of the religious bias at that time, admissions were given based on your last name. So if you're a Christian, the chances of you getting to study what you want to study was really hard. And at that time, I wanted to be a gynecologist. Well, not because I had interest in medicine, but you know how growing up we're made to understand that you can either be a doctor or a lawyer. Those were the courses that, you know, your parents would respect more, or you be, you know, more respected in the society if you're a doctor, you know, or if you're called a barrister or whatever. So I wanted to be a gynecologist, and I remember going to pick up my admission letter, and I got environmental biology written on my admission letter, and I began to cry, and I was like, oh, I didn't want to study this, you know, and all of that. But interestingly, I always had interest in climate change and environment right from a very early age, because I would, you know, attend modern United Nations conferences. I would speak about, you know, climate, Paris Agreement, Kyoto Protocol, and the likes of that at a very early age. But then gender was still not anything exactly I would, you know, I thought about venturing into, again, because of the background, because you have to be a rebel to be vocal in the north. It's just, there's just this feeling that as a woman you're supposed to be submissive, you're supposed to just be quiet, you're supposed to take whatever comes to you. If you're being vocal, that means you're never going to find a man who's going to marry you. Men don't like competition, men don't like being equal with women. So, you know, those narratives were being sold over and over again. So I knew that being in this, you know, space was not an option for me at that time. But I think I started to have a different thought and a different feel when the whole Boko Haram crisis, the insurgency in northern Nigeria escalated. You know, people were being killed, women and girls were displaced. In fact, my village has been completely burnt down. People had to move, you know, into Maiduguri, that's the capital, you know, and they were residing in IDP camps. And so when you go to those places, you see these pathetic situations that women and girls have to put up with. Sometimes the men were killed. So these women and girls, these women were widowed. Some of the girls were forced into child labor, you know, child marriage. You know, they were exposed to conflict-related gender-based violence. So at that time, my friends and I were obviously touched by this, because it was happening under our nose. It wasn't something that we read on the newspaper or watched on TV. So we began to, you know, contribute, you know, put little funds together, trying to see that we get, you know, necessary help to those women and girls. And we never intended to go to the camps and see them or have conversations with them. We just wanted to drop those things and leave. But of course, because of how sad the situation was, some of those women and girls insisted on seeing, you know, the people that were bringing those items to them. They wanted to have a conversation with us. It was hard, you know, at first hearing some of those things, because I would break down crying. I would think that before you get to speak to women and girls, you would have some form of bravery, and I didn't. You know, it was really sad hearing them narrate their experience, saying how they saw their spouse being killed, how they saw their children being killed, you know, how their daughters are being forced or taken away. And at that time was when, you know, about 276 Chibok girls were abducted in northern Nigeria. And, well, thankfully now some were released, but I think we have about 196 that are still in captivity. And the famous Leah lady who was, you know, forced to convert to Islam and all of that. So some of those girls were released and they were brought back with, you know, HIV, AIDS, yes, you know, so many STDs. There were, some of them were, you know, pregnant at a very early age. You find out that girls at the age of 10, 11 were already carrying babies. So, you know, babies having babies, literally. So those were some of the conditions that those women and girls were in. And it was a hard decision for me to make, to start to, you know, speak for, to be vocal, to make sure that those their stories got to the right authorities, because it felt like the media were just reporting everything else but what was happening in, you know, in those places. So it was a great challenge for me, and that's why at the beginning I described my journey as dauntless. You know, I had to make up my mind to not be a coward anymore, so to speak, to just start being vocal and start speaking up for those women and girls. So I began to fall back on resources that I'll find online, you know, toolkit that, you know, other people would had put together, you know, on how to advocate, how to be vocal, how to identify the strength in you, because before you get into this line of job, you need to identify your strengths and weaknesses and, you know, capitalize on your strength. You know, trying to find people I could speak to, people that had already begun this journey to talk to. But again, in northern Nigeria, like I said, feminism is not something that was out there. Well, thankfully now people are, you know, taking turns and, you know, being more vocal. But back then, you would hardly find anyone who would go into that. So I began to, you know, read online. I began to speak to those women. I have an aunt who has an NGO that deals with women and reproductive health. So I would go there to volunteer, you know, if they're having campaigns in those local government areas, I would follow them, you know, and see what was being done. And interestingly, when I moved back to Abuja, which is North Central, I was opportune to join an organization called Connected Development, which is a non-governmental organization that empowers marginalized communities in Africa. You know, we empower them with things like information, data, and access to governments, and most importantly, how to hold their governments to account. So we, you know, so much believe in transparency and accountability. So I was able to join that organization, and I began to lend my voice. I began to carry out a series of campaigns, you know, targeted towards women and girls.
Wow.
Yes.
That's a lot. But I'm going to take you back a little bit. So going to those camps, did the women, did it seem to you like they wanted to talk, you know, and then were they getting any form of support? And then the other thing I want to clarify is that were they allowed to bring back their children, the ones that were released by Boko Haram, for instance? Did they come back with their babies or they left them behind?
Right. So falling back to your first question, of course they wanted to speak.
Wow.
You know, they wanted to, they were so eager to just have someone listen to them. You know, they just wanted to share, you know, talk about their experience, not necessarily get help. Well, yes, getting monetary help and incentives were part of the things that they wanted, but most importantly, they just wanted to, you know, share and let people know that this is what is really happening. Wow. They would say things like, oh, let the government help us, this is what we're going through. You know, our girls are, you know, married off at an early age. My husband is being killed. They just wanted to share. Wow. And I don't think that they got the necessary support that from the government. I don't think so. Well, there are organizations at that time, because if you go to Borno State now, you have 1,001 NGOs that are there. You know, non-governmental organizations are camping there. You know, so one would think they're taking advantage of the situation or whatever it is. We really don't know. But there was a hike in, you know, non-governmental organization in Borno State. So there are organizations that were trying to help these group of people, but I particularly don't think that the government really did anything aside camping those women and girls. And you would think that psychosocial support is one of the most important things that should be given to those women and girls, especially the girls that were released from captivity. They should speak to somebody, most importantly an expert, you know, about their journey, what they went through, and try and help them. So yeah, some of the girls were back in the camp with their parents, with the kids that they were having, and some were just not.
Oh wow, so sad. And you did say that the other girl, the very popular one, he was like one of the few that refused to do what they wanted to have. So did she find, she was asked to, declare it's the Islam, right? And then she refused. She said she was not going to give up her Christian faith. So did she eventually do that? Because
because she's still in captivity, the news is not quite clear. Or I haven't followed up, but so far so good. We know that she refused to convert, but she was married off, and I think she has a baby now, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, so that was when the whole initiative Bring Back Our Girls movement began in northern Nigeria.
I just wonder if she's even still alive.
That's what a lot of people say. They doubt.
It's really sad. It's sad what happened and how things still are going on. But then I wanted to know a little bit about your thoughts and insights about how your work in the context is in the context of the women's movement in Nigeria.
Right.
Where is your work in the context of women's movement in Nigeria?
So, like I mentioned earlier, women movement in Nigeria or feminism in Nigeria is something that has just begun to gain or began to see daylight, I would say, because previously a lot of women would not be vocal about things like that, but now a lot of people are talking about it. There are a series of organizations that are lending their voices to help women get through or address issues that affect women indirectly. So yes, I would say that my work cuts across, addressing issues that affect women and girls, particularly around gender-responsive budgeting, girl child education campaign, and campaigns to eliminate all forms of violence targeted towards women and girls. And there's a lot of collaboration and partnership with existing organizations that are already doing, such work, or that are, planning to carry out such advocacies targeted towards women and girls. So I would say that there's a lot of collaboration and partnership with those organizations, because I believe that one person cannot, change the world. So when you have more partnership, more people trying to, attain a certain goal or achieve a certain goal, then there's more impact.
Okay, thank you so much. And what specifically are your the main commitments in your life?
Maybe could you rephrase, please?
What would you say is the main focus of your work?
Right, okay. Yeah. So the main focus of my work is trying to, particularly targeted towards, eradicating gender-based violence. I know that it's a hard task, it's something that cannot be eradicated because you have to use multi-stakeholder engagement, multi-dimensional, approaches to try and, eradicate or curb gender-based violence. But I'm seeing how, you can have men and boys, who are involved or who are allies in ending gender-based violence. For me, I always say that we spend a lot of time talking to victims or survivors of gender-based violence. Nobody really talks about the potential perpetrators, people who have the capacity to abuse women or girls. Nobody spends time, talking to them. And I always say that you spend your effort and your resources as women, to train your girl child, forgetting that your girl child is probably going to end up with a boy child who was poorly trained, and then at the end of the day you realize that you've really done nothing. So I'm also trying to address girl child education in Nigeria, because as it is right now, I think we have over 20.5 million out of school children, which most of them are women and girls from northern Nigeria. So trying to see that girls are going to school, and not just going to school, they remain in school. So trying to see whether there's an increase in girl child education, retention, and enrollment in northern Nigeria, and to see that, there's a free and compulsory 12-year education for every girl child in Nigeria. Well, in some communities that we visited, we realized that education was indeed free, but there were levies that were attached to it. So at the end of the day, you realize that it wasn't really free. They're asking them to pay for, uniforms, some levies on their examinations and all whatnot. So at the end of the day, parents could not afford some of those things. And we know that in Nigeria, women are harder hit than men by poverty due to the nonchalant emphasis that is being placed on girl child education, poor access to health care and all whatnot.
Wow. I see how you can be an inspiration to these girls, especially because you are young, and then they can easily connect with you and with your story. Thank you for the work you do. So what does your career generally look like? Do you see you going?
So because, I don't know, I think I'm a late bloomer, it takes me some time to kind of figure out what I'm doing.
Okay.
Maybe because from the start I never really, you know how some people just have a map of their life. They can tell, oh, from here, you know, I'm moving from point A to point B. I don't think I have that map, to be honest.
Okay.
I sort of take the day as it comes.
Okay.
But for me, the most important part, or the peak, or where I would love to get to, is on the, you know, international stage, you know, be able to advocate for women and girls fearlessly, not just doing it in Nigeria, in Hidden, being on a stage or in a platform with other, you know, influential women and girls, you know, talk about the likes of Amina Mohammed, talk about the likes of Ngozi, you know, just prominent Malala, people who have, you know, voiced out, and people who have, you know, fearlessly done so over time. So I see myself probably in the UN, you know, advocating for women and girls on a global force. So yes.
Yeah. So and then so far, thus far, I know, yeah, maybe the journey is just beginning, or you're on the journey. What would you say is the most significant lifetime achievement professionally?
So you can call me biased if you want, but I'll say being in the University of Michigan has been one of my greatest achievements. A young girl from northern Nigeria who didn't think her career was going to take a turn, and, you know, finding myself here in an with such an opportunity, being in a diverse community, being in one of the best schools, you know, has been an eye opener, has been challenging, has been a fantastic opportunity. I tell you, I never thought that I would be here, but, you know, being selected as this year's, or 2023, Twink Free visiting social activist has been fantastic. It has given me the opportunity to guest lecture, something I would ordinarily not do. I mean, my work is always in the grassroots, you know, speaking to women and girls, speaking to men from the informal sector, men and, you know, boys in school, girls in school. But then being in an academic space has been enlightening, and, you know, it's given me an idea to go back to school.
Okay.
So
Thank you so much for sharing so far. So I'm going to ask you, maybe some of this might be, you know, repeating things you've said before, but I know you are able to handle it. So what drew you to the work that you have been doing, and how did you first come to be involved in this work area?
Right. So the first thing that, or what drew me first to the work I'm currently doing is, you know, the current situation in northern Nigeria, the insurgency, you know, Boko Haram crisis. And I tell you, you know, Boko Haram has actually been one of the major setbacks in girls' education. Because, I mean, when you look at the meaning of Boko Haram, it means education, or Western education, is prohibited for every girl child. So they are literally saying girls should not go to school. And I found that, you know, challenging. Why would you ask girls not to go to school? Wouldn't you want to have more researchers? Don't you want to have more girls who are, you know, preferring new technology, new innovation? So for me, it was the whole insurgency and the situation in northern Nigeria, and then being part of it, seeing that family, friends, relatives were immediately affected was challenging for me to have started. Yes.
And how has your involvement changed over time?
Right. So coming from someone who didn't have an experience, you know, who would just go to IDP camps and speak to women and girls, and now, you know, someone who has over time accumulated a lot of experience, I would say that I'm nowhere where I would like to be, but I'm definitely not where I was years ago. Yes.
Okay. And so has your work changed in ways that have been shaped by experiences of your life, for instance?
Absolutely. You know, a lot of experience, not just my experience, you know, experiences of women and girls that I've been opportunity to speak with, you know, especially victims or survivors of gender-based violence, people who will share their story. My work has, you know, so sometimes you hear some of those things and you can't even go to bed. You know, you're up all night thinking, wondering, how can I help? What can I do? Am I doing enough? You know, why isn't the government saying anything about it? It's so frustrating. It's so frustrating. So yes, I would say experiences of other people has also, you know, shaped my work. Okay.
Yeah, and I'm also thinking about the fact that, yes, maybe not from a very wealthy background, but in some ways you were privileged, right?
Yes.
You didn't have those horrible experiences that people from your own part of the country had or are having, but then when you are in the space with them, do you think about your privileges, and how does that thought impact your relationship and interaction with them?
Right. I'm so thankful that I haven't had the opportunity to experience any of those things, because I wouldn't pray for anyone, even my worst enemy, to experience some of those things that those women are currently facing or have faced. However, because I am from where they are from, and I've seen, relatives who are directly, impacted by some of these things, it can't help, I can't help it but then feel like it would have been me.
Okay.
So in as much as I'm thankful, I still have it at the back of my mind that, it would have been me. And it's Nigeria. You can't predict what is going to happen. It can be me tomorrow. I mean, we don't pray for that to happen, but anything can happen. Tables can turn, and you find yourself in such situations. So yes, I'm really thankful that I'm not in that, that situation. But if my friends and family are affected, then I think I'm also affected.
So you're able to, put yourselves in their shoes and connect with them. Absolutely. And be able to think what they are thinking. Absolutely. And also consider how they can be supported.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I think conversely, have you experienced any personal changes as a result of your engagement in feminist academic work or activism? Maybe more of activism than
right.
Yeah. Have you experienced, personal changes as a result of your engagements?
Sure, I have. I've seen growth. I've seen growth. I've seen more confidence. I've seen more courage. Ordinarily, I probably won't even be able to grant this interview. I'll be so timid and, put back in my shell, thinking that everything is just beautiful, from where you are. But then when you step in, the grassroots, when you're advocating for women and girls, and you see some of their real life experiences, it just makes you have courage. You're forced to have courage. You're forced to have confidence. So yes, I would say that I've been able to develop some personal strength. First of all, you have to identify what your strengths are. When you want to venture into this line of career, you need to know what your strengths are, and you need to leverage on your strengths, ensure that you create change and bring about necessary impact.
Okay. And then what kinds of sites, the sites of action or intervention, have you primarily focused on, and why? Okay. I know you talked about working at the grassroots, but even grassroots is like a broad field.
Yes, it is.
What specific sites and why the focus?
Right. Because before we begin any of our campaigns, we usually carry out a baseline research to find out what the issues are, women are underrepresented, when you speak about political participation, especially in a place like Nigeria, where about 50% of the population are women and girls, yet we have a very poor percentage of women in government. So if you talk about the just concluded 2023 elections in Nigeria, we had one candidate who was running for the post of the presidency, but then unfortunately she gave that up for a male candidate. That would have been a gleam of hope or light, but then unfortunately all our hopes were dashed because she had to just give up that position. So women are underrepresented in governance. When you talk about access to healthcare, women do not have access to healthcare. We've run campaigns where we've seen women give birth on the roadside because in their respective communities, they do not have a functional primary healthcare facility. They don't have enough healthcare personnel on ground. They don't even have electricity, Ronke. So some of them have to give birth, have to trek or walk to neighboring communities. Wow. Some of them, we've heard instances of women who had passed, because they bled on their way, they couldn't make it. And particularly a woman who gave birth in, I think it was southern Nigeria, she gave birth on the roadside. So women are, do not have access to healthcare. There's gender bias in education, where you have a lot of out-of-school children as a result of early child marriage, child labor, if you even go to some of those schools, you realize that they do not have gender-responsive infrastructure. Those infrastructure are not convenient, or they're not comfortable for the girl child. In the school that we went to, we noticed that the male student and the female student share the same bathroom. So if those girls are on their period, they have to miss days of school. So we're talking about every month you're missing 5, 6, 7 days of school. Sometimes they don't even have potable drinking water. They can't even clean up. So dilapidated.
And privacy.
Oh my gosh, and privacy. Some of the schools don't even have adequate fencing. So if there's anything, community members or people from neighboring communities come into those schools, have access with those girls, and they leave. They can't even report.
Wow.
In some communities, we notice that some parents were not allowing their children go to school because there's this cultural, traditional, and religious bias that hinder girls from going to school. Some people just believe that if you invest in a girl child or investing in the family she's eventually going to get married into, so it's a waste of resources. Some girls in the eastern part or southern part of Nigeria are being married off because their parents want to, receive bride price. That is a way to sort of bring incentives or funding into the family. So they marry off their children for how much? $100. Girls who are starting off, who have potentials in life, are being married off. So these are areas that I focus on, and most importantly for me is gender-based violence, stimulating a nationwide movement that is aimed at ending all forms of violence targeted towards women and girls. So we do that by engaging, men and boys in informal sector, boys in secondary schools, in primary school, teaching them the basics of consent, setting up clubs that would help boys to be educated and re-educated about their, toxic masculinity, teaching them things about patriarchy, and healthy relationship with women and girls.
Wow.
Yeah, so these are some areas that I focus in.
I think that's kind of new, and I believe that you'll have like a big ground to break in that area. So now we're going to continue on reflections on your work. So what was your experience, for instance, as a woman working with the organizations and in your organization, and even as you step out of your organization to do some of the work that you do? I believe that you meet other people, you meet men, but what have been your experiences?
Tough. Really tough. Being a young woman. Probably if I was an older woman, it would be easier, because in Africa we have this respect culture. So the older you are, the more people will tend to listen to you. If you have more gray hair, people will listen to you and think you're more experienced. But unfortunately, I don't have that. I'm young and I'm starting off, so it's really hard to get people to listen to you, especially men. There was a particular place that we went to in a motor park, trying to speak to the road users, talking about drivers, road users in general, teaching them about gender-based violence and how it's not okay for you to abuse your wife, because statistics have shown that there's a high rate of gender-based violence in motor parks, when women are trying to board vehicles, especially women with disability. They are being touched inappropriately. Sometimes these men are speaking to them and they don't even know that she can't hear. But then they touch her inappropriately, they drag her, and all of that. So we're having this training on this fateful day under the sun, speaking to the men. And then one man or one driver from nowhere just comes out and says, you can be here from morning till night, but you see the issue of rape, I will rape my wife if I want to. So tell me, where on earth are you going to start from? Wow. We've had conversations where religious leaders, the likes of pastors, imams, would tell you things like, but if my wife doesn't want to have sex with me, I need to take it by force because it's my right.
I'm married to her. I married her, or maybe I bought her.
Oh my gosh, yes, she's my property. So these are things that you would hear. And again, getting them to hear you as a girl takes a lot of effort. You need to ensure that, trust is being earned. So you need to sometimes go to those communities, live with them. Let them know that, okay, you know what, I'm for you, I'm not against you. I'm not here to fight you. We're here to try and bring in an intervention that would favor you. So sometimes it's a lot of work. Sometimes we're training the women and girls, and the men will storm into the training centers and say, oh, you're corrupting my wife, you're brainwashing my wife, you're brainwashing my kids. It's really hard. So sometimes you have to invite them or have a different set of training for them to let them know that, no, we're not telling them anything out of the ordinary. We're just letting you know that if your wife is able to, have less domestic tax at home, then she'll be able to go out and, try and make ends meet and try to provide for the family. So imagine if you have two parents who are bringing income, you have more income. So this means you should try and help your wife at home. You can do the basics. You can help. Nobody's saying you should go and cook, but if you cook, that's good. But then you can help, take care of the children, pick up children from school, ensure that she has lesser tax at home, just so that she's able to go out and make ends meet. So imagine if she has to go out, go to the office, or go for petty trading, still come back, cater for the family, cook, and it's exhausting. So a lot of times, these women, you know, are going through it. Their mental health is on a different level.
Wow.
Yeah.
But I think I'm kind of concerned. The women themselves, how do they take this conversation, this campaign against how they've always had it? You know, do they see you as coming to disrupt the status quo, maybe disrupt their life, or like it's not your business? Do they have that kind of attitude, or are they open to accepting this and thinking a lot about how these things that you are talking about can actually improve their lives?
So it depends on the place. You know, Nigeria is very vast, you know, and Africa as well. So it depends on the place. Some women are receptive, you know, they are willing. Some just don't know how to go about it. So some of them are telling us, help us, but don't make it obvious that you're helping. You know, some are just saying, it's not your business. You're coming here to spoil a beautiful family. We don't need that help. And when women like that speak, you can tell that it's coming from a place of probably trauma. You know, they've been used to it. They don't know any better. So sometimes we usually don't even force our opinions or our interventions on them. We just try to make sure that they see reasons. But for the ones who are very receptive, we go all out trying to help them.
Okay. So I know you talked about this too. How you know, big is the issue of prejudice and discrimination even among your colleagues?
Oh my gosh, it's crazy. But I have been lucky to work in a very inclusive and diverse space, you know, where, you know, we actually have more women in my organization. So the chief executive officer is very intentional about recruiting more women, because he is a he for she champion. So but then sometimes even amongst, you know, colleagues, you hear things like, oh, she can't handle it because she's a woman. Don't send her to this community because she's a woman. She's too weak. She's too, you know. So, but then sometimes you have to approach it with wisdom, I guess. You don't fight it. And I think the greatest challenge is not even the workplace, is the family you're coming from. Someone was telling you, a family member, that, oh, I heard that Hyeladzira is now one of those feminists. So, well, let's hope she gets married. This is a conversation that a family member thought was okay to say. You know, but like I said, not everybody will see the change you're trying to bring. Not everybody will accept it. You know, heck, even Jesus Christ tried to bring an intervention and not everybody, you know, was welcoming. So you have to do your bit and hope that people would really see that it's worth it.
And then, so what's the significance of feminism to you?
So over time, the narrative of feminism has been changed to fit different kinds of, you know, terminologies. You know, some people say feminism is trying to take back our rights. I get that. For me, feminism is not just equality, it's about equity. You know, it's about fairness. I don't want to be told no because I'm a woman. I want to be told no because I have probably tried and they've seen that I cannot, you know, I don't have the capacity. So it's all about fairness, giving women and men equal opportunity, and then they should be judged based on their capacity and not because of their gender. So I see feminism as that.
How do you define it? Do you have like your own basic definition of feminism?
Feminism for me is equity. I would say equity. I'm skeptical about using the word equality because whether I like it or not, I'm from Africa, right? And a place where all of these things are shrouded by religious, you know, what is it called? Religious concepts. Biases, you know. So it's difficult for you to say a man and a woman are equal. And again, I'm not in any way saying that because we have our unique strength. I don't want to be a man, you know. I want to be a woman, you know. However, we have our own individual strength that should complement one another. So again, there's now a movement about toxic feminism where, you know, women are now trying so hard to, you know, be so toxic and take up the entire space. No, I'm just about.
Let's talk more about it. Did you say
Toxic feminism.
Toxic feminism. Yeah,
Yes.
can you tell us about
Yes.
that? That might be new to a
Right.
lot of us.
Okay, so well, thankfully for social media, you get to see so many things from different parts of the world. And I think there was a time, was it last year or 2 years ago, a lot of people we say things like, I'm not a feminist, I just don't want to be associated with feminism. And when you hear why, they'll tell you things like, oh, women are now trying to exclude men entirely from the conversation. You know, and we talk about things like toxic masculinity, where men are excluding women, and now there is, you know, maybe because the status quo is changing, maybe because women are now being vocal, there's no balance anymore. So I believe feminism should be about balance. I know that over time women have been discriminated, they've been marginalized, so it's okay for us to want to take, you know, the seat or something, but then there should be an equal opportunity. Remember that we're talking about equal opportunity. You know, we're not saying that now that women are taking over, there should be, you know, more women. Good for us, because if you empower one woman, you empower the entire nation. If you educate one girl, you educate the entire nation, right? But then there should still be an equal opportunity. Men shouldn't feel like, you know, they are now on the exactly, because see, if you speak to a lot of boys who are starting off their lives, they will tell you things like they can't even talk about it. You know, they're being told to just keep quiet. So when we go to schools to speak to boys, I think the highlight for me is always, you know, the male students being so excited, saying things like, Auntie, I'm so happy that you're bringing this intervention for us. Because a lot of times, there are clubs only designated for the female students, and we're always looking like, when is it going to be our turn? You know, so when we're having interventions and we tell the females to excuse us, they're so excited. Or for the first time, there's an intervention that targets only men and boys, and they start to tell you things that you didn't even think a male child goes through. So it's, for me, feminism is about creating that balance in the system. There should be a balance. You know, if we're saying we have about 50% of women in the world, then there should be a balance.
Okay, so 50% women, 50% men. We are not saying women should take over, right?
Well, yes, well, women can take over in some aspects, you know, because over time, like I said, we've been marginalized. But we shouldn't take over in a toxic way. We shouldn't take over in a way that the male child is now being excluded entirely. Okay. There should be some form of balance.
So that we don't begin to perpetrate the same things we are fighting
against.
Right?
Exactly.
Okay, thank you. Now it's kind of clearer. And would you consider yourself a feminist, therefore?
Yes, I will consider myself a feminist. I will consider myself a feminist. You know, way back I would have said no, I would have shied away from it. But now I think that it's about time, you know. So I would consider myself a feminist because I believe that I'm fighting for a true and good cause. So yes.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so then again, we're moving to a different level of experience with the organization. Can you tell me about your experience and the strategies you used when you were working, or when you're working with your organization? Your experience and then the strategies that you use when within the organization, and maybe without, when you go out to do your work on, even working with other organizations, because you collaborate with other organizations.
Right. For instance, if you have a campaign, you know, one of the first things that we do is try to go on an advocacy visit, you know, trying to familiarize ourselves with our stakeholders, because a lot of times you cannot just impose your, you know, your opinion or your intervention on these people. You have to identify the key and influential stakeholders in a particular community or even within the government. And there's a particular way that the government perceives our organization, because we're all about transparency and accountability, which, I mean, the sector or the, you know, the government isn't so transparent or accountable. They always see us as coming for them. So you have to have a familiarization visit, you know, with them, understanding what has been working, what isn't working, and what needs to work in those communities. And then we begin to map out our interventions to identify, you know, other stakeholders. For instance, media, we work a lot with media. We have identified the strength of media to amplify and disseminate our work. So oftentimes we go on radio. We use a lot of traditional radio, you know, to try and get the message down to the people in the community, because they don't even understand, some of them don't understand English. So we have to, you know, use different languages, exactly, dialects, yes, to try and reach hard and far to reach communities. And then we begin our campaign. We use different approaches, and we always try to reinvent the wheel as we're campaigning. So we initially, when we're mapping out our strategies, we have a different perception, and then when we get on the field, we realize that it's really different. What happens if those people don't accept your intervention? What happens if they're not willing? You have to change your dynamics. You have to change and re-strategize, go back to the thinking board, involve team members, and partnership and collaboration has always been something that has worked for us over time. So we partner with organizations just so we don't replicate, or we're not doing the same thing over and over again without any results. So we try to leverage on each other's strengths, to implement or carry out our various and different campaigns. Yes.
And so what's the major issues that you focus on?
We focus on, addressing, bias in education. Gender bias in education. We're trying to see that women participate in government. We're trying to see that more women are being elected. We're trying to see that more women are being represented in various levels of governance, be it local, state or whatever. We're also trying to see that women have access to healthcare facilities. We're also trying to see boys and men joining the fight against gender-based violence. So these are some of the interventions that we usually focus on in my organization. And we're trying to see that policies are being institutionalized at various levels of governance, be it national or sub-national level of governance. So we're passing or we're advocating for policies. So for instance, as a result of some of the campaigns that we've run, the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act was passed in a northern part of Nigeria, in Kano State. It's an act that speaks to victims and survivors of gender-based violence. Saying that men and women can be raped, and if they are being raped, what are some of the things that we need to do? Even though some states have passed some of those acts, they are hardly being implemented. So we sort of advocate for the implementation of those policies.
Yeah, and then thinking about northern Nigeria, what are those specific and hardcore cultural biases, cultural practices that you work to address, and how are you doing it?
Right.
Yeah, because
I would say traditional religious and cultural bias have been the most difficult, and it's all about behavioral change, which is the most difficult part of the work that I do. Imagine speaking to somebody who has, who is probably 40 years or 50 years, who has lived all their life, in a misogynistic, environment. It's so hard to try and change those conceptions. So what we do is we try to make sure that trust is being earned by both parties. We try to show them or let them know how different it will be if they take a different turn. So we're not in any way saying don't practice your religion or don't practice your culture. However, see it from a different lens, so we do a lot of mentorship, where for instance, if we're dealing with boys, we take them to, organizations that are being led by men who are doing well. We let them know that, okay, if you do not abuse a woman, if you don't harass a woman, you can probably be like Obama, for instance. You can be like some prominent person who is doing very good work that they are doing. So we give them access to women in political positions, especially for those who want to participate in politics. Let them speak to them about their challenges, how they were able to overcome some of those challenges. So we do a lot of mentorship. We do a lot of talking, letting them know or letting them identify what they have in them, because some of them feel so worthless, especially victims and survivors of gender-based violence. They feel like they have nothing else to offer, and then you find that there's a high rate of suicide. Some of them want to take their lives. They rather not stay in that situation. So we do a lot of therapy, psychosocial support and all whatnot, trying to change those norms, which is very hard. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes, in fact, sometimes we're currently still running those campaigns. It's something that might take forever to achieve, but I tell you, baby steps just makes the entire process seamless. You know, every day you go, you speak to these people, you know, you give them real life situations, you take them out of their situation to see what life can be if they are living in a different kind of, you know, context or vicinity. And yeah, that helps them to have a different mindset.
Yeah, because I'm here busy thinking about the whole culture of early marriage,
child
labor, girl child education, and just thinking, how are those specifically being addressed? Who do you work with? Because going to the people alone, and then because you do a lot of policy stuff,
right,
you know, but then do you have people that you've connected with that are in policy making decision positions and can collaborate with implementing some of these policies, and how is that going?
Right. So we've been opportune to meet with you know, legislators, you know, people in government, the media, most importantly, you know, collaborating with organizations who have, you know, over time tried to carry out those campaigns, just so we don't replicate efforts. And in the community, the most important stakeholder for us would be, you know, maybe the youth leader, religious leaders, traditional leaders, you know, because there's a high rates of, you know, community members listening to those group of people, you know, so influential people like the market women, we try to, you know, seek their buy-in and ensure that they understand what we're doing. So it's easier when we get those people on our side, you know, having, for instance, a pastor or an imam of a mosque, you know, on our side. So we encourage them to use their platforms to disseminate some of the things that they've learned, to try and encourage the, you know, members to provide safe spaces for women and girls in those places. So it's easier for us to address, you know, some of those early marriages, you know, child labor through, you know, key and influential stakeholders such as religious leaders, traditional leaders, legislators, women in government, trying to provide mentorship for other people, and the likes, and media. I will always emphasize on media, that there's so much power in media.
Okay. Yeah, and I do understand how a lot of issues can be politicized. And we know that these things are primarily enshrined in religious doctrines. Yeah. How are the religious leaders, especially because it's northern Nigeria and it's more like Islamic, how are they responding to some of these things, you know, because they are going to tell you that, oh, it's our culture, our Quran, our religious culture allows us to marry 5 wives and throw them out, you know, anytime we are not happy, and marry another one. And even the whole idea of VVF, vesico vagina and fistula, and when they get these babies impregnated, and during child labor they begin to leak after childbirth, you know all of the things that go into labor, and then once these girls are leaking and they can't have sex with them again, they kick them out and they pick different girls and they cover it up with what their religious you know doctrines provide, and as even enshrined, like they would tell you in their religious laws, and even what do you call it, the Quran. How are they responding? Do you think they are making progress? They are working with people generally to try and see how things can really change. Are they disposed towards seeing changes? I think that's the big question.
It is hard because Ronke, I wouldn't lie to you. I don't think they're making so much progress, to be honest. I don't think so, because for instance, the penal code in northern Nigeria, you know, in the penal code, it's okay for a man to inflict harm on his wife, you know, on the as long as he's trying to correct his wife. So you can use a sharp object to harm your wife, you can rape your wife, as long as we're trying to correct her. You know, again, in all of the, you know, laws and policies that we have in Nigeria, rape between a man and a woman has not been clearly spelled out. So as a woman, you can't go to the court and say, oh, my husband raped me. They will laugh it off. They will say, this is an issue between your husband and your wife, settle it
In your
You know,
family.
exactly. Sometimes you
Wow.
realize that the police doesn't even have the capacity to respond to some of those cases. Anyway, so back to the religious leaders. It's hard because during the training, you hear things like, but why was she wearing what she was wearing? So there's the culture of victim blaming. I don't know if we're going to get any headway with that, you know, because you're trying to tell them it's not about what the woman is wearing. It's not about where she was. It's about you as a person. If you cannot control yourself, then that means you're going to go around sleeping with everybody. So they say things like, oh, it's okay for her to be raped, or it's okay for her to be touched as long as she was dressed inappropriately. A man cannot control himself unlike a woman can. Making excuses, saying things like a man is polygamous in nature, you know, things like that. So when we're having trainings with them, there are times that we're having, you know, training with religious leaders, and some of them walked out.
So they are perpetrators.
Of course.
So how then do they, you know, do they? So then it looks like there still needs to be a lot of
Oh my
work.
gosh, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done.
And challenging.
Exactly,
Yeah.
challenging work,
Yeah.
especially around the behavioral change, getting them to have a different conception about some of these things. So I would say that we need to intensify our efforts.
Yeah.
You know, we need to keep sensitizing them, creating awareness, letting them see the bigger picture, giving them lifetime examples and situations. Like the interview we're doing, you know, talking about this, you know, somebody else can hear it. It's a form of sensitization or creating awareness, you know. So these are, you know, efforts that we need to keep intensifying and hopefully over time.
Yeah, yeah, it will take our entire lifetime. But then, and I think the other question I'm thinking about is that, have you seen like changes from regime to regime, for instance? Because again, we're going to have a different set of leadership in Nigeria in a couple of months. Do you see things changing or moving in a more positive direction than they have been?
I honestly don't think there's going to be much change, you know, knowing how the election played out, you know, how a lot of Nigerians are displeased with the result of the 2023 elections, which felt as if, you know, the independent National Electoral Commission, which is INEC, imposed a candidate on Nigerians. I don't think there's going to be so much change. However, it's the same party. It's APC. So we don't think, I personally don't think there's going to be any change when it comes to this presidential election. However, I'm hopeful for the gubernatorial election that is going to happen next week. So hopefully we're going to have a change. We're going to have younger people, you know, because I believe that, I mean, why would you, a younger person who understands the needs of the youth, you know, because clearly for now, women and girls have been taken out of the race. I think there's one woman in Adamawa, you know, Binani, she's only female gubernatorial candidate, and we're hopeful that she
in the entire country.
Wow. Yes, we're hoping that she would, you know, win that gubernatorial seat. However, I still don't think that anything's going to change, because our candidates or their candidates was imposed on Nigerians. So I don't
that's
think
the
so.
presidential.
The presidential.
Again, just looking at the election coming up and the candidacy and all of the people that have shown interest, how much have women supported women that want to go into politics, for instance? Because how much? Because women are like maybe half the population of even more. How much have women supported women that are, you know, interested in political powers in Nigeria?
So it's a two-way thing. The good thing is more women are vocal now. You know, there's social media. So you see that there are a lot of women that are tweeting or, you know, are saying things like, oh, we want this woman to win, you know, pushing the woman agenda, you know. The bad side is, because of the way Nigeria or Africa is, because of the patriarchy, women are even a culture. Women are even, you know, not being supportive. That's the honest truth. Because I remember when I watched, you know, the only female candidate for the presidency election hand over to the current president-elect, a lot of women were insulting her, saying demeaning comments. No, I don't think anybody really supported her. And there's a way the media also pushes this narrative. We're not really amplifying the work that these women are doing. It's always about the male candidates. There's and of course, when you look at the political structure in Nigeria, you see that there's this godfatherism.
Okay.
You need to be, wealthy. You need to have some form of assets or money, and a lot of women really don't. Some women are struggling. They don't have as much money. They don't have what's it called? They don't even have an exposure to maybe arms or all those godfatherism or whatever. You have less organizations supporting them. Well, I know that there are organizations that try to have conversations with women that were going in for different positions and all of that, but I don't think women have been supportive enough.
Okay. Yeah, but I know you talked a lot about what your organization is doing, but what are some of your future expectations?
I'm hopeful that, or we are hopeful that, in the nearest future, people living in the most remote part of the world, and by most remote, I'm talking about people in the grassroots of the grassroots, are able to hold their governments to account. Are able to say, okay, what, it is my mandate as a citizen of this country, and I demand that the government provides, primary health care facilities, wash facilities, basic education, and the likes of that. So it's just saying people living in the most remote part of the world, being able to hold their governments to account. That is the, future expectation for us.
Okay, nice. And in that light, how would you think about the relationship between scholarship and activism, for instance? There's scholarship, there's activism. What's that connect between both in
so
general?
When you say scholarship or scholars?
Yes, talking about scholarship, education.
Right.
Those, maybe those in feminist scholars, for instance, feminist researchers versus activists who are primarily out there. What's the relationship? Do you see like a connection, or are they like two separate pathway for feminism?
Right. So I would say there's a huge connection. Because coming from the grassroots and being in the space, I see myself living two different worlds. However, living best of both worlds. If that makes any sense. So I have been on the on the field, and I've had the opportunity to be in the academic space, interact with women who are carrying out different research around other women, scholars who are feminists. There's a huge connect. There's no disconnect in that. We need one another. We need the women in the academic space to with their research and all of those things, and we need women in the grassroots. So there's definitely a huge connect. There's no disparity in that line.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then in your work, how do you see that play out?
Being here has encouraged me to want to go back to school. Like I said earlier, I'd love to go back to school, and because you can't gain, there's so much knowledge out there that you need, and just interacting with students here has made me realize that, being in the four walls of the academic space, there's so much that you need to gain from this, not just being on the field. You need to balance it out, perhaps carrying out more research, finding out more solutions that need to be out there. So for me, I would see there's definitely a connect.
Okay, and then now we are going to talk about the intersection of your work with the women's movement in Nigeria and globally. What is your analysis, evaluation, and expectations of the development of feminism in Nigeria?
I'm happy with how feminism is going in Nigeria. I'm happy that there are more women who are vocal now, who are, taking the stand, who are leading those conversations. It is so, enlightening. It's so amazing to see that happening. The Nigeria of before is definitely not the Nigeria of now when it comes to, being active for women. So I am hopeful that, we're going to keep having more women-led organizations, more civil society organizations that are focused on women and girls, have more women in government who are able to champion those causes. Because I always say things like, nothing for us without us. You can't exclude women from decision-making, processes and expect that our issues will be factored or tailored. You don't even know what a woman is going through if a woman is not there to tell you the solutions that she needs. So we need to see more women. But I'm hopeful for Nigeria. It's a conversation that we've seen over time taking a huge turn. So I'm hopeful.
All right. And then your relationship with other women's organizations in Nigeria.
Right. So I'm also excited about all of the collaborations and partnerships that I've been able to, have with other women in various organizations. And these women are willing to let you leverage on their expertise, leverage on their wealth of experience, wealth of knowledge, resources to carry out some of the work that we're doing. So yes, I have seen a huge collaboration and partnership with, other women who are doing the same kinds of work that I'm doing.
And with other activists?
Oh my gosh, yes, with other activists, yes. And the good thing is, you don't have to travel sometimes. That's the importance of social media. Social media helps you connect with other people from different parts of the world who are carrying out this work. So yes.
So do you have national campaigns on issues or global campaigns that you kind of lend your voice to and,
So both national and global campaigns, So I forgot to mention that one of the things I'm working on here is a toolkit, for gender advocates. It's a self-guide manual that would help intending gender advocates or gender advocates who have begun their career to be able to, advocate for policies to be institutionalized at various levels of governance. So because for me, starting off, those kinds of, resources helped me to be vocal and to find my foot. So in a resource like that, we have collaborations with different global feminists, where they are lending their voices, they're encouraging other gender advocates, they are reviewing the document, they are making input and feedback. So it's a document that has that is tailored towards the context of Africa, but they're not restrictive. So it's open to other gender advocates or other feminists that are from different parts of the world. So I see myself collaborating on different issues, especially through the toolkit that I'm currently developing in the University of Michigan.
Okay, and that's I think this kind of leads us to this next question in terms of how your work is related to women's movement generally.
Right. So it's about proffering solutions. It's about engaging more women and girls. So through the toolkit, like I mentioned, for gender advocates who are thinking of starting their career in this line of action, it will help them to be vocal. It will help them to have a resource that they can fall back on, that they can use to build their strength, their capacities, their skills to be able to advocate for women and girls. So it's a resource that I believe that every gender advocate or anybody in the feminist movement should have access to be able to advocate for women and girls as early as possible, because one person can't obviously change the world. We need more people who are in this.
All right. So already it's about building connections.
Right.
And so do you have existing connections with other activists, scholars, and organizations in other countries of the world?
Oh my gosh, yes, I do, particularly in Africa. And so I must say that I am part of the Global Shaper community, which is an initiative of the World Economic Forum. So it's a community of diverse, talented and young individuals who leverage on their expertise to carry out campaigns that would impact their immediate communities. And that community is about 500 hubs from across the world. So I have been opportune to partner with other people who are carrying out the same work, not just around gender, around environment as well, from across the world. And particularly my experience here in the University of Michigan has widened my connection and networks with other activists from across different parts of the world. So not just Africa now, we're talking about in the US here, we're talking about in Canada, we're talking about in India, we're talking about in China, different people. This opportunity has really widened my network.
Okay, and how did these connections come about?
So besides being part of the World Economic Forum, this current opportunity of being the 2023 Twink Free Visiting Social Activist was, a fantastic opportunity to widen my network.
Okay.
Yes.
How did it happen?
An application, actually. I got an application actually my boss, the CEO, sent me, because he's fond of sending young people in the organization opportunities. Apply, push yourself, do all of that. So he sent me a link to it, and I was like, oh my gosh, I just finished an application. I'm so tired. But then I was like, okay, you know what, it's for gender equality, and this is what I'm doing. Why not? So I applied, submitted my application, and I guess I got lucky.
And what have this meant to you?
Oh my gosh, it has been eye-opening. It has been, I would say, challenging, because coming here, I didn't know what to expect. This is my first time in the US. Wow. It was a beautiful experience that I am so privileged and opportune and thankful for. Yes. Okay,
so you've had these conversations, in several spaces on campus. Yes. I believe you've engaged with students and staff, and then besides the University of Michigan, with other institutions and organizations that you are connected with globally. So how do you make sense of the differences and similarities in the kind of issues that are raised, by these other organizations or by other people?
Right. So I would say that gender disparity knows no boundaries, so irrespective of your race, your class, where you're coming from, whatever it is that you do, these things are happening. Gender disparity cuts across all of the sectors, and they are happening. And being privileged to have interacted with students, and some lecturers or professors, I realized that people are actually going through it as well, especially from their individual countries, because there's so much diversity in this university. So when I'm speaking about gender-based violence, I'm talking about poor access to healthcare. It doesn't sound strange to them, because they have also, heard about people who have had the experience, or personally they've, also had their experience. So I'd say there's a similarity. Most of the issues are similar, and that is why I know that it will take collective and global effort to tackle an issue that is similar to, to different people.
Yeah, and so far, have you learned some things from their own approaches for dealing with the issues that they deal with?
Absolutely, I have. I've learned, how they've been able to navigate some of those things, just so we don't go back to Nigeria. I don't go back to Nigeria and repeat effort. I've realized how to, leverage on resources, how to leverage on expertise, and how to. And the interesting thing is they've been so helpful, and willing to engage. So they say things like, Hyeladzira, how do I learn my voice, to help tackle some of the issues we're having in Africa, so I've been able to learn, so many things that I've been able to work here, and things that are not working as well. For instance, I had a conversation with a professor here that was letting me know that his son wrote to his legislator. It's something that we try to do in Nigeria, where we encourage citizens to write to their legislators to request for information, and I tell you, they don't even respond. So by the time they are campaigning, that is when you have access to your legislators. Once they get elected, they change their cell phone, their office assistants become high and mighty. They don't even want to speak to you. So, but then he told me that his son had to write to a legislator talking about, public smoking and all of that, and they responded immediately. So for me, I could see, and not just reaching out to legislators before they are being elected, how to hold them to account even after. So we need to do a lot of monitoring. We need to do a lot of follow-up. So yes, I've been able to find out, practical steps and practical solutions to some of the things that we're facing, and being able to take note. And I'm hopeful that if I go back, I'll be able to implement some of those things.
Yeah, I think the other thing that comes to mind is that I saw a list of salaries and allowances that politicians get in Nigeria, including what they are given for their, their communities. Do you have them go back to implement any programs or projects to support their communities, their constituencies that voted them into office? Because money is paid for those purposes. Do they do it?
Oftentimes, no. I'll tell you that for free. Oftentimes they don't, and it's a whole back and forth. So what we usually do is there's a document called tender, where the federal government, would publish list of, contracts and projects that should be carried out in communities. So we go through those tenders, we identify projects that are in line with our thematic areas, that is WASH, primary health care and basic education. We go to those communities to ask those people, it is being said that there should be a functional primary health care facility in this community. Is there? A lot of times, no. So what we do is we get the contact of the contractor, we pay them visits. We use the likes of freedom of information to get information from them.
Okay.
We involve the media. We do a lot of town hall meetings where we have like an informed debate between the citizens and the government. We have key and influential stakeholders in the room, letting them know that it is the mandate of, I'm not going to provide a functional primary health care facility for you. I won't do that. But it's the mandate of the government to be able to do that for you. So we try to ensure that they hold them to account. And a lot of times we involve the citizens in the tracking and monitoring of those projects to see that they are being implemented to the last. Sometimes we notice that they use substandard items to complete those buildings, and then we ensure that citizens are involved. So involvement of citizens has been something that has really, really, really helped us. So a lot of times they just make pledges that they don't fulfill, but we involve citizens to take ownership and be able to ensure that that those pledges are being fulfilled.
Wow. Yeah, we're going to move to another level because it's unfortunate that people and so it still goes back to the fact that people are not yet there in terms of holding their government their representatives to hold them accountable for the pledges that they made to them, or even some of these projects you spoke about that they are supposed to implement in those communities. Despite getting the money, they don't get the work done, and then nobody really knows where the monies go to, right? But then I want us to go to another topic which is kind of different from the people now. Intersectionality. How has the women's movement addressed other markers of inequality and oppression besides gender?
So when you're doing this work, sometimes it cuts across so many things. So it's a multi-faced dimension approach. Sometimes you're trying to bring an intervention for a particular cause, and then at the end of the day you're trying to address. So I feel like, yes, the feminist movement or women movement has been able to address other issues of governance, of electoral processes, just other issues that not necessarily affect women and girls, but in a holistic approach, I think it has been able to address some of those things.
Okay, is it has funding been helpful in getting some of these tasks done?
Oh, absolutely. International funding has been so helpful, because I would say that if the government were doing what they needed to do, we wouldn't be talking about getting funding, right? But yes, funding has been a huge part of it. It has been able to help get some of those tasks done.
Okay,
yes.
I see how some of these projects can be helpful in achieving other issues, when you empower the woman. So whatever is, yes, economic empowerment, then when her life begins to transform, she can send her child to school. So we see girl-child education improving, and then that also resulting in women's broader participation in politics.
Of course.
And then that eventually, kind of dovetails into societal progress, right? Because everyone is involved.
It's a ripple effect. By the time you carry out a particular intervention, you see it having different branches, which at the end of the day will not just benefit those women and girls, but also men and boys in the society. So like you mentioned, you encourage or you empower a woman, she's able to make ends meet, she's able to send her girl child in school. And a lot of times those women, because they are widows, they are left with the burden of sending their children to school. So by the time she's able to send her child to school, her child is involved in school, stays in school. The child is going to grow up, become somebody, and then the child. So there's a ripple effect. You realize that one thing leads to another, and it keeps leading to something else, which is very positive.
And that's growth.
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's growth.
So let's go to more recent event in all of our lives. COVID-19. How has COVID changed your work?
Right. So I would say positive and negative. I'd say that. So negative in the sense that, ordinarily we have a lot of out of school children, but with COVID-19 we had more out of school children. Especially women and girls. They missed about 2 years of school, and we did provide, the government provided school learning platforms for students, but unfortunately, students who were in rural communities do not even have access to the internet, so they automatically missed those, years of school. And with COVID-19 brought about a high rate of gender-based violence. There was a lot of intimate partner violence during COVID-19, one of the highest recorded ever. Partners, men were raping their wives. I don't know what was happening. Is it the pandemic? Why was that happening? But you had a high rate of rape cases during COVID-19. So yes, it did bring women and girls backwards. But then positively, because we realized that we could carry out our work without necessarily being there. So the virtual aspects, because during COVID-19, a lot of, organizations, a lot of individuals realized that they could actually work from home. They could leverage on technology to carry out their work in hard and far to reach areas. So we were able to leverage on that to reach women and girls who were in, far to reach communities.
Okay, nice. And how has this impacted the work that women have been doing to address women's issues generally in Nigeria?
So I think it has made a lot of women-led organizations to reinvent the wheel, if that makes any sense, to use a different approach and to probably sit up as well. Because now when you have more out-of-school children, when you have more cases of gender-based violence, you have to intensify your effort. So I would say that COVID-19 has really made several and various organizations to use different diverse approaches to be able to, ensure that women and girls are safe and not being discriminated or not being marginalized.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, thank you. So 2 years, at least, let's talk about 2 full years of COVID. Do you remember specifically maybe 1 or 2 things that happened between organizations and the way that these, impacted the women
and girls,
and girls generation in Nigeria?
So there was a lot of collaboration, virtual collaboration, which meant that more women were reached. So you had cases where organizations were having, mentorship, online mentorship sessions, webinars, online conferences for women and girls, especially women and girls who do not have access to traditional educational opportunities ordinarily. So some of those technologies were used to, help them further broaden their skills that they would need to achieve their career growth in their individual or respective areas of life. So yes, there was a lot of collaborations from various organizations for women and girls.
Right. Nice. Thank you. Yeah, I know you started to talk about your project. Yeah, if you can just tell us, even as we move towards the end of the interview, kind of tell us more, because we kind of listened a little bit to it at the reception. Everyone was fascinated. We really want to understand how we can be involved and how this could be beneficial to a global audience that you intend for it to be. So if you can tell us more about that project and how it's evolving.
Okay, great. So just a backstory. So last year, we started a gender movement in my organization. So it's called GAMA, Gender Advocate Movement in Africa, where most of the advocates that I've worked with over time were brought together. So in different campaigns that I've implemented in different states and in different African countries, we have different gender advocates that we've worked with. So we decided to bring them together in a consolidated framework for them to be able to collaborate, consolidate, educate, and engage on issues affecting them. So things like sharing experience, sharing knowledge, just there's something about collective efforts. By the time you work together, you have more impact, right? So with that movement, well, the purpose of the goal for that movement is to be able to have, women and girls, survivors and victims of gender-based violence on a virtual platform. So I call it the lab, you know, the lab where you have people providing psychosocial support, you have agencies responsible for reporting those cases, you have victims and survivors of gender-based violence, you know, where they can able to assess one another. So if, for instance, I'm a woman who has been abused or is going through it, I can be able to, there's a number for me to reach, you know, a therapist or someone who can provide psychosocial support for me. So as part of the resources that I'm hoping will be embedded on that platform is what I'm currently working on. It's called the Gender Advocate Toolkit. I'm going to find a fancy name for it much later, but for now, it's called the Gender Advocacy Toolkit. Now, I keep making reference to how I started, you know, how those resources or toolkit that I found online were able to help me, you know, understand the nitty-gritty of gender advocacy. But again, at that time, I couldn't find an easy to understand resource. It was it was technical, you know, especially for someone who is just starting off their career in gender advocacy. You need something that is, you know, easy to understand, because gender advocacy is a feminist movement. That's the beginning of it, you know. So you need something that is easy for you to understand, relatable in your own context, you know, nothing too technical. So this toolkit is everything I couldn't find online at that time. You know, a self-guide manual for gender advocates to be able to advocate for the Sustainable Development Goal 5, which talks about gender equality and women empowerment, right? So it's going to be relatable to their context. We're going to have, you know, bits about self-care, because I noticed that as an activist, sometimes I just want somebody to ask me, how are you doing? How are you holding up? You know, who do you speak to? Because when you hear some of those things, it just messes with you emotionally, mentally, psychologically. You are left with the trauma, even more than the person who has gone through it, because you're trying to make sense. You speak to girls, you know, young girls who are 2 or 3 and they've been raped. And you start to think, I'm going to have a child one day, or I want to have a child one day. Am I even sure I want to have a child? Do I want to bring a child in this world? It messes with you, you know. So there's a component of self-care in that gender advocacy toolkit that talks to advocates, you know, about taking care of themselves. That's not being selfish.
How to seek help.
How to seek help. You know, how to seek help. That's not being selfish. You have been trying to save the entire world. It's okay to take a break.
Understand that you also need help, right?
Oh my gosh, yes. And also, I think for me, it's the human angle stories in those toolkit. You know, sharing of stories, letting people know how I began my journey, how other feminists have also begun their journey, letting them know that they're not alone in it. You know, seeing some component that talks about, you know, the current international and national policies that addresses, you know, gender disparities in Africa. And the toolkit is just that talks about the context in Africa for now. It's a life document that I hope would evolve, that would over time address global challenges. But then the thing is, global, like again, gender disparity issues cuts across globally. It's not just happening in Africa, it's happening everywhere, you know. So and again, it's the toolkit would be easy to understand for especially people who, you know, have disabilities. So we're talking about the visually impaired, we're talking about people who are deaf. It will be translated in audio, you know, formats. Eventually to be translated into different dialects so people can use it in grassroots to be able to advocate for, you know, things like that. So we're trying to just bring up advocates as early as possible. You know, they don't need to be in the 4 walls of the school. They don't need to, you know, study women studies or whatever, but they can just pick up those manuals and, you know, understand that self-advocacy on its own is a thing, because there's a lot of bullying, there's a lot of malnutrition, you know, from different people. So yeah, these are things that would help people too.
Wonderful.
Yes.
And is it going to be like a one-time product, or are you setting it up in such a way that it's auto updates, or you update it by yourself from time to time, you know?
Yes, it's not a one-time product, you know. It's to be updated. It's a live document, so as things change, you know, it will be updated over time.
All right, nice. I look forward to seeing some not final product, but a product in place, since it's evolving and even as it continues to grow. And I want to thank you so much, Zira, for granting this interview, coming to the University of Michigan. It's been an awesome time having you around. We've engaged at different levels, and we look forward to hearing more about the amazing work that you do in your life, in your work, and globally. Congratulations.
Thank you so
and
much.
And we wish you safe journey as you travel back to your home country.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.